Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you to the 31st lecture of the course Management, Organizational Policies and Practices. We'll be continuing from the recap of the motivation theories. We discussed the reinforcement theory, which is built on the concept of the positive and the negative reinforcements, and the theory says that it's not about this theory does not basically gives the explanation on the motivations of the individuals through their cognitive evaluations, but through the behaviors of the individuals, that how the changes in the behavior of the individuals can be made, and those changes can result in the motivations of the individuals, right? So the theory basically says that when an individual acts in ways that are desirable and that are required by the organization, then the positive reinforcement of that behavior should be made, and the subsequent behavior will also be in line with that behavior, right? So if an individual is coming on time, he comes daily on time, then you should you should recognize his punctuality, and you should appreciate him and praise him for his punctuality, and this will reinforce this positive behavior of the individual in a way that he will try to be on time and try to be punctual in the next days to come as well. And on the other hand, if an individual is late sitter or is a late comer in the class, for example, if there is a student who is a late comer, and then if he comes late, then you scold him for his coming late, right? And the next time he will try to come a little earlier than that, and you again scold him for coming late, and this way by way of this negative reinforcement, you will correct the behavior of the individual that is not desired, and as a result of this negative reinforcement, the individual will try to improve his habit, and he will try to come earlier and in time, right? So this was the concept of this reinforcement theory. Then we had a discussion on the equity theory. The equity theory stated that the individuals, they try to make perceptions of the fairness in treatment by calculating their input-output ratios and comparing that input-output ratio with that of the referent others. So they choose some referent others with whom they can make comparisons, right? And those referent others can be within the organizations, and they can even be outside the organizations. And if the individuals perceive that their input-output ratio is lower compared to the input-output ratio of the referent other, then they will perceive that there is inequity taking place with them, and their justice perceptions will be distorted, right? And on the other hand, if they believe that their input-output ratio is higher than that of their referent other, then they will perceive that they are being they are getting more than their counterparts, right? And again, there will be perceptions of inequity, but there won't be negative perceptions in this case. And if they perceive that their input-output ratio is equal to that of their referent other, then they will perceive the equity, right? So the counterpart is also getting the same as they are getting, right? So the individuals, they behave differently when they perceive inequity, right? And when there are negative perceptions of inequity, like their input-output ratio is lower compared to their referent other, then they try to take a number of steps, such as they try to change the referent other altogether. They start believing that referent other is not the right one, and they change their anchor and change the referent other, or they change their inputs, they change their relative contributions so that their input-output ratio can match that of the referent other, right? And they can even lodge, they can be violent, they can lodge a number of protests, etc., to bring the situation more equitable in their eyes, to make it more equitable, right? And as we discussed, that these referent others, they can be from within the organization, and they can be from outside the organization. So your equity theory, it is not based only within the organization. So it's not only the comparison that especially for the managers who are at the higher level, they try to make the comparisons of their input-output ratios with that of their counterparts who are not only within the organization but in the industry, right? Who are outside the industry, outside the organization, in the other industries as well. So So if I'm a manager in one organization and I am on this grade and I'm having this much salary, I will try to compare my salary and my grade at this level, at this managerial position, with that in another university at another managerial position. What is he or she earning, and what is his or her grade and scale, right? So it's not only within my university that I'll be making comparison with the other managers in the other departments, for example, but it's also outside the university in the industry, right? And you make your comparisons, and then on the basis of that you make your fairness perceptions, you develop your fairness perception. So if you here in this case, if I perceive that I am getting lower than my counterpart in another organization is getting, then I would try to retain the equity by finding another job elsewhere where I can get a comparable salary and package, and I would try to quit this organization in order to restore the inequity. Then we discussed that the justice it has there are basically three types of justice that we discussed. The distributive justice, which is the distribution of the outcomes, the perceptions of the individuals about how the outcomes are distributed, right? If the second type of justice that we discussed was the procedural justice, which was the fairness perceptions of the individuals regarding the procedures that are used that are used to arrive at the outcomes, right? So the procedural justice is basically strongly related to the commitment of the individuals with the organization and the perceived organizational support, because the individuals perceive that if the organization is using this the fair procedures, then they feel committed with the organization and they feel that the organization is caring for them and the organization is supporting towards them. And the research and the theory also suggests that if the individuals perceive that the fair procedures have been used to arrive at certain outcomes, then they are not much violent and angry, even if the outcomes are not in their favor. If for example in the performance evaluations an individual receives very negative performance evaluations, and as a result based on those negative evaluations his increments are also very low, right? So so the distributive outcome that he's getting is not very favorable, right? And it might make the individual unhappy and violent and might perceive that the unfairness has been done with him. But if he perceives that the system which is used to arrive at those outcomes, how the performance evaluation was done, how it was calculated, how was he evaluated vis-a-vis how were the counterparts evaluated, right? And what is the validity of the tools to measure the performance, right? And was the manager biased or unbiased who made those evaluations? Were the evaluations subjective or objective? The more objective the evaluations are, the more likely it is that the procedure would be perceived fair, and the more subjective the evaluations are, the more likely it is that the bias of the manager may come into play, and there might be some bias in the evaluations, and the chances of the unfairness perceptions that is also likely to be higher in case of the subjective performance evaluations. Then we discussed that if the individuals perceive the procedural fairness, then the distributive outcomes are also going to be more acceptable for the individuals. And then we discussed the interactional justice, which is the how your supervisor treats the subordinate. What is the relationship quality between the supervisor and the subordinate, right? And whether the supervisor deals the subordinate with dignity and respect and mutual trust, and how whether he shares all the necessary and pertinent information with the subordinates or not. So the degree to which you deal with how the quality of your treatment with your subordinate and the sharing, quality and quantity of sharing the information with the subordinates, they determine this interactional justice perceptions, right? If your supervisor is sharing informations with you and he's dealing you with respect and dignity, then you will perceive interpersonal interactional justice. And if that is not the case, then you will not perceive interactional justice. So interactional justice is basically related to the it has been reported to be related to the commitment of the subordinate with the supervisor, right, and the organizational citizenship behavior with the supervisor as well. Then we have this expectancy theory, wherein we saw that how the individuals, they do a certain task when they expect a certain outcome from that task, and that the outcome which is valuable for the individuals as well. So that is the motivation for the individuals, and this theory basically has very important implications for the managers, and it has very important lessons for the managers on how they can manage the motivations of their employees, of their workers. The theory basically says that the different individuals, because they are different on their motivational orientations, some individuals, they are more intrinsically motivated, and some individuals are more extrinsically motivated. Therefore, the managers, they need to understand what are the motivational orientations of the individuals, right? Whether so for me, for example, recognition from the manager and the praise from the manager might be more important, and a conducive work environment, and where I can work with autonomy, where I have a flexible work hours. These things, which are the intrinsic benefits from the job, they might be more important compared to the salary or promotion, because I have a flexible job, and I have a full autonomy in my job, right? And I can very well balance my work and family. I can do work at home, and I can do it with autonomy. That might be more important for me compared to a job where there is no flexibility, where there is no autonomy, and where I cannot combine work-life balance, right? And but where the salary is higher than what I am getting here. So it's all a matter of preferences, it's all a matter of priorities, and it's all a matter of different motivations for different outcomes, right? So my motivation for this outcome, which is more autonomy and more freedom, that is that outcome of more motivation and of more freedom and more autonomy is more important for me, that is more motivating for me than an outcome of choosing a job where the salary is higher but these conditions are not there, right? So if we carry on with this hypothetical example, we see that how the different individuals, they can have different motivations, and different outcomes can have different influences on the behaviors of the individuals. So the individuals, as per this theory, will perform a certain task or activity only when he believes that that outcome will lead to that task or activity will lead to a certain will lead to a job performance, and that performance will lead to a certain outcome, and that outcome will be valuable for the individual. So if the individual knows that his engagement in certain activity will lead to a certain will lead to higher performance, and that will lead to an outcome, but that outcome is not interesting for the individual, or the individual does not want to have that outcome, then that is not going to be worth it for the individual, or that is not going to be motivating for the individual, right? And so so if a manager in an organization, for example, is arranging a training session, and this training is voluntary for the employees, right? And some of the employees may attend that training, and some of the employees may not attend that training. So that is because some of the employees, they may feel that the outcome of that training is not beneficial for them, and some of the employees feel that outcome of that training is not beneficial for them, right? So there can be a number of examples like this, that how you can have have different motivations for the different outcomes, and your behavior will be determined by those motivations from those different outcomes. Then the job characteristics model, wherein we discussed that how the different how the jobs that can be designed in such a way that it can be made it can be more enriched, and how the motivational job potential can increase the individual's job satisfaction, commitment, productivity, and performance. And we discussed a number of conditions, a number of factors here, such as the skill variety, how they should be the different skills, the tasks, they should be different tasks, so that they can employ the different skills of the individuals, and so that the individuals, the job is not monotonous, right? You don't have to do the same task repeatedly all over again, right? So it gives you more variety in your job, by implication of more and more skill, by the application of more skills, right? And then we discussed the concept of the task significance, that what you're doing is really important, and that is important in the organization, that is recognized in the organization. The greater task significance you have, the greater motivation that task has for you. So if I know that I'm doing a task in the organization which is not really very valuable in the organization, or which is very trivial, right, then of course that is not going to give me a sense of motivation, right? And then there has to be other factors that we discussed, was the autonomy in the job, the degree of freedom that you have in performing a certain job. The more autonomy you have, the more empowered you feel, right, and the more motivated you feel to do the job, right? And then we discussed that how these different job characteristics, they determine the motivations of the individuals, they make the jobs of the jobs enriched, the work enriched, and as a result motivate the individuals, and as a result enhance the attitudes, bring positive changes in the attitudes of the individuals, and they perform better. Then of course we discussed that jobs how the jobs can be redesigned, and what can be the different alternative work arrangements, such as offering the flex time to the individuals, right? And they can basically in telecommuting, right? And there are a number of different options and a number of different alternative arrangements that give flexibility to the workers, and that can be really motivating for the workers, right? And job sharing, wherein the two individuals, they are basically two or more individuals, they share the job, and that gives flexibility, for example, the working woman, or the flexibility to the old people who cannot work full time, but who have a huge amount of knowledge and experience, right? So they are the different alternative work arrangements that we discussed, that how they can basically motivate the employees, right? And the redesigning of the jobs we discussed, under the redesigning, that why the different options to redesign the jobs, such as the enlargement and enrichment, and we discussed that in how the enlargement is may not be very may not be a good option to redesign the job, because it may not be enhancing the motivation of the employees, but empowering the job, but enriching the jobs that can empower the employees, and that can be motivating for the employees. Because if you really have to increase the motivation of the employees, then you need to enrich the jobs by introducing these job characteristics that we discussed in the job characteristics model. Then we discussed the concept of employee involvement, that why this employee involvement is important, how when you involve the employees in the important decisions of the organization, how that leads to valued outcomes, because the individuals, they when the management is using the participatory style of management, in which the employees feel that they have certain say in the organizational decision making, then it can enhance the employees' motivation, and it can enhance the employees' commitment and their satisfaction and their productivity. They identify more with the goals of the organization, and so on, right? So the but it has been seen that the managers, if they use this participatory style of management, they should make sure that the individuals or the employees who are participating in that decision process or in the problem solving, they are knowledgeable and they are well skilled. So that if the employees, they are not very knowledgeable, then they might be giving the ideas that are not very practical, or that are not very doable, or that might actually cause some harms, right, and or they might be more costly for the organization. So the management needs to make sure that the employees, they have the necessary skills and knowledge to take part in this participatory management, participatory process of decision making or of problem solving or whatever. Then we also discussed that there are different ways of this employee involvement, such as this participative management that we discussed just now, and then the representative participation, in which, such as the labor unions, the formation of labor unions, wherein the labor representatives, they represent all the employees of the organizations in different types of negotiations. Then also there are certain representatives from the employees who sit with the board of directors and make important decisions. But this way of employee involvement has been criticized, because it has been stated that these representatives, they are generally presenting they're portraying as so safeguarding their self-interest, but not the general interests of all the employees, right? And then we discussed the concept of the quality circles, wherein we discussed that how a number of people, they come together in one time in a week or so, and they discuss their problems, and they try to come up with the possible solutions to those problems, and they also discuss that how the productivity, quality, and reliability of the products and services, it can be improved. So a number of issues on those different issues on the different areas wherein the improvements can be made. They discuss all those issues for 1 hour or so. These quality circles have also been a point of criticism, because it has been stated that only sitting for 1 hour out of the 40 hours in a week, that is not sufficient to ensure employee involvement, right? And they are just abandoned by the management to show that they are really involving the employees and their processes. Then we saw that these employee involvement is linked to the motivation theories, because getting the employees, involving the employees in the decision making, we have just discussed that what is the importance of involving the employees, how it motivates the employees, right, and how ultimately it influences the attitudes and behaviors of the employees. And a number of theories that we discussed, the motivation theories that we discussed, such as the job characteristics model, and the other theories on motivation that we discussed, they all also link up to this employee involvement programs, because these the Herzberg's theory, right, and these theories, they basically talk about the enriching the jobs, right, and the jobs, they can be enriched by involving the employees and giving them the power and autonomy and giving them a say in the organizational decision making. So then we also discussed that how the rewards, they can be used to motivate the employees, how there are a number of extrinsic reward options to motivate the employees, wherein the organization needs to determine what it has to pay. It has to establish a pay structure by seeing the nature of the job characteristics, the job requirements, and the characteristics from the incumbent of the job, right? What he can offer, what skills he can offer, what is the value added from that individual who is performing that job, and accordingly you determine the pay. But it's not only about the person and the job fit that determines that the pay, but also what the market is paying for the similar job specifications and the similar job characteristics. So you need to make this analysis in the internal market and in the external market, and then you need to develop and establish your pay structure. Then we also discussed that these pay structures, they are they can be fixed as well as variable pay programs, and we discussed that the variable pay programs, they have a number of benefits, because such as the piece rate pay, wherein the employee is paid only for the units of production, per unit of production, as per unit of production. So if the employee is if somebody is producing or selling 10 bricks in a day, so he's paid $1 per brick, then he will be getting the $10 for the 10 bricks. If he someday if he sells 12 bricks, he will get $12, right? So this is there is no base pay here, but only you are getting the variable pay for what you are contributing, what is your output, what is your input, you get the output accordingly, right? So here in this kind of programs, but also we discussed that in this kind of programs such as a piece rate pay, you cannot offer it in all kinds of jobs and at all levels, right? So for certain jobs, of course, you cannot, you have to make these base pay arrangements, and you have to fix your salary, the salary of the individuals, whether he's performing giving more output, more input or output in 1 year, or he's giving it lesser, but you have to fix the salaries, right? And then this kind of the variable pay systems, we discussed that it has the advantage for the organization because it gives the flexibility to the organization in the times of the recessions, especially when there is not sufficient demand for the products of the company and the costs are really high. Then when the pay system, because the pays, they are one of the biggest costs that the organization has, right? So when the pay system is flexible or it's variable, then of course as a result in the reduction in the demand of your products, and as a result of reduction in your profits, you can also reduce your costs, right? Because they have become variable now, and as a result you can reduce your losses, or you can increase your profit margins. Then we discussed the merit-based pay, which is that which is tied to the performance, the pay for performance, which is also called that you are tying the performance evaluations with the pays, and right. And herein what the managers, they often do is that they try to make gaps, or they try to introduce wide gaps between the high performers and the low performers, so as to create distinction, and also it is a kind of a motivation for both the parties. So the ones who are good performers, they try to pay them very well, and those who are bad performers, they try to keep their pays lower, so that there is a big gap between the two, and it is a motivation for the low performers to reach at the upper end, and it is also a motivation for the upper performers to keep performing higher and higher, seeing the gap that is there between the low and the high performers, right? And we discussed in here that how your performance evaluation system needs to be very much sound, and it needs to be very much valid and reliable for this kind of merit-based pay system to work. Otherwise, it is going to introduce biases and injustices in the eyes of the employees. Then we discussed that how the companies, they also give the different the bonuses to the employees. Some companies, they have this fixed bonus policy every year, and some companies, they tie it to the profits that the companies earn. Then the skill-based pay systems, which are used in some of the companies, they are also being used in Japan. This kind of pay system, they link the pays to the increases in the skills of the employees. So they basically encourage the employees to learn more and more skills, and the more skills they learn, it leads to the increase in their pay. But we discussed that there are certain downfalls to this kind of system as well, because if the individual has learned a lot of multiple skills, but the organization does not require all those skills, then one, it is going to be demotivating for the individual, and two, if the organization as a result increases the pays of the employees as a result of increase of learning all those multiple skills, then the cost for the organization will increase, but actually the value added will not increase, because the organization at that time, or actually it does not need all those skills, right? Then we discussed these profit sharing plans, in which the profits, they are divided and shared between the employees. And then we discussed this gain sharing plans, which is a form of of rewarding on the basis of the teamwork and the team effort, right? And then we discussed the employee stock ownership plans, wherein the organization, it gives the stock options to the employees, on wherein their the price at which they can own that stock or buy that stock is much lower than their face value or the market value of that stock. So and we discussed the implications of these different pay plans, their different policies, and the different motivation theories. We discussed from the lecture 13, we discussed how the managers they manage information, right? And we discussed that what are the different characteristics of useful information. We started off with the 4 aspects of this characteristics of useful information. That is, it is complete. If the information is not complete, of course, then it means that you are missing on some of the data. And when you are missing on some of the data, then maybe you won't be able to make good decisions and make accurate decisions, because the data on which you are missing, that might be very important and very critical data, right? And if you get that data in time, it might change your decision. So complete information is actually useful information. Then the reliability, of course, of that information is really important. What is the source of that information, how that information is gathered, right? And this is all important. If the information is not reliable, again, it can lead you to the false conclusions, and it can lead you to making of the wrong decisions. Accuracy of the information is very important. We discussed that how if the information is not accurate, then again it's going to be problematic, and the timely information is again needed. If the information is not timely, you're getting it late, then again it's no use getting the information late, and it means that you have not made the decision at the right time, right? And we discussed that how the reliability and accuracy of the information, especially, for example, we discussed it with the example of the airline industry, and we saw that how the accuracy of the information, that is really important in that the airline industry, and how the wrong information, it can lead to huge damages for the airlines. Then we discussed that there are certain costs that are associated with collecting or having this useful information, such as the acquisition costs, the costs that are incurred on acquiring that information. And we discussed it with reference to State Bank acquiring the information from all the different banks. Then the processing costs, which are involved, of course there are processing costs that are involved as well in the information that you are acquiring, right? When you are processing that information, first how you are gathering that information, if you are going from bank to get that information, so that is, these are all the transport costs that is being incurred, or the cost on the storage costs, etc. They are all the going and coming back and etc. They're all the processing costs. And then the storage costs, which I gave you the example of the purchasing of some storage device, etc. Right? So they will all be included in the storage cost, the space that is being utilized, the computer that would be needed. And if it is a manual storage, we discussed it, both the digital and the manual information systems, and we saw that if it is a manual system, then of course you need a room to store all the manual papers if you have, and the material, then you need to store them all in some store or some room, and you need to pay the rents for that store or room, and you need to the space that is being occupied, there all the storage costs, right? And if it is in the form of the software, then there are other types of storage costs that are involved. Then we discussed the retrieval costs. So if it is again stored manually, then to retrieve the information that you have put in there, you need to incur a lot of some cost to retrieve that information, which can be in the times of the time, and if you have to retrieve the information from some other source or elsewhere, then the retrieval costs will be different, and the communication costs that you have to incur when you have to communicate that information. And then we also discussed the strategic importance of information, and we discussed it with reference to the first mover advantage and the resource-based view of information technology, wherein we studied that how if the firms are gaining this competitive advantage on the basis of the information technology, that competitive advantage, that information technology will be a resource for the firm, but that resource needs to be that resource needs to be really robust. If that resource is not robust, that is, if that resource is not rare, and if that resource is immutable, and if that resource is easily substitutable, then that resource is not robust, and the competitive advantage that you gather on the basis of information technology, that will not be sustained for a longer period of time. So we discussed it with the help of the first mover advantages, and the first mover advantage, that the sum of the companies that gain this first mover advantage from the information technology, they can only retain that first mover advantage when their core competencies they are sustained for a long period of time, and when those core competencies are robust, and the firms, they do not let those robust core competencies transfer into core rigidities, right? So sometimes the first mover advantage that also converts into disadvantage when the firms who are coming after the firms who or the firms who are the imitators, who are following this imitating strategy, sometimes they come up with the same technology or with even better technology, and they offer the same technology or even better technology at much. They come up in the market with at a lower cost, right? Because of we know that first mover advantage is costly. Although the reports are that the first mover advantage, there is around 60% or 63% of the first mover advantage, and the chances of the market share of the first mover, they are much higher than the ones who are following them. But to retain that first mover advantage, the firms need to make sure that it understands what its strategic capabilities are, and how it has to convert those strategic capabilities into the dynamic capabilities, so that they do not fall into the trap of the strategic drift. We also discussed the example of the ATM the ATM machines that were offered by the large banks when they started off with those ATM machines, right? And how it was to the disadvantage. They were the first movers in the market, and how the small banks, it was a challenge for them to invest in those machines, and how they joined hands, they collaborated, and they introduced the ATM machines, where through forming a link wherein from one ATM machine you could process the the cards of the different other banks who were on that link. And how this initiative of these banks, how this innovation of these banks, how it really proved a sustainable competitive advantage for them. Because the customers, they could now process the transactions from any ATM on the link of any card with very few or with very little processing cost. And then of course the capturing of the information, there are a number of sources, again the manual source of capturing information and the electronic source of capturing the information. So the electronic sources are the barcodes, such as which are for example on the we discussed in detail that they are on the different items, on the different products, and these barcodes, and they are electronically captured. And then the electronic scanners, which are used to scan the documents, etc. And so instead of manually entering the documents or the information in the documents, you can just scan that document, and that is in place with you. Then the storing of the information, we discussed that there are a number of devices to store the information, such as the microfilm. There is this CD-ROM, which is used to store the information. There are the DVDs, which are used to store information, which are more in capacity than the CD-ROMs. Then the data storage tapes. Then there is this hard drive, and in hard drive we know that mostly the primary information is or the primary data is stored in hard drive, and the hard drive is the easiest to access and most easily it opens. But the only disadvantage of this hard drive is that it can get corrupted and it can crash, right? So you need to have a backup option as well with you. Then we discussed that for the processing of the information, there are a number of ways for the processing of the information, such as the centralized processing, the distributed processing, and the shared processing. And then we also discussed how the information is accessed and shared. Then we discussed the basic control process, right? And we also saw that when control is possible and when control is necessary. I gave you a number of examples to discuss that when control is possible and when control is not possible, and when it is necessary and when it is not necessary to control, right? And we also discussed the various methods that managers can use to maintain control, and we described the behaviors, processes and outcomes that today's managers are choosing to control their organizations. We also had a discussion on the different personalities and the personality traits of the individuals. We saw that the personality are the inherited characteristics of the individuals which remain stable over time. They do not change over time, and we discussed that how the two twins, how they are because they have their genes are similar, their genes are alike, therefore the twins, how they have similar likes, similar habits, similar dislikes, and those habits, likes and dislikes, they are so similar between the twins, but they are not that similar between the two siblings who are raised in the same family and by the same parents, but their attitudes and behaviors, they are still different. But the twins, how their attitudes, behaviors and the styles and their likes and dislikes and habits, etc. are alike. So we discussed that there are a number of tests that are used to measure the personality, and it depends upon the what is the nature of the job, what are the different requirements from the job, and how the selection procedure and the interviews and the different test mechanisms should be kept in place, which are customized to the specific job requirements, and the individual is tested against the personality traits which are important to perform the particular job. Then the important the point here was the Big Five personality traits theory that was given in the 1990s, and this theory it really proved to be a breakthrough in the personality literature, and it's a very comprehensive basically theory which gives five traits of the individual's personality that are really comprehensive, and that cover most of the aspects of the personality traits of the individual. And we discussed under this the extroversion, wherein the individual is very much is very sociable, and he's very aggressive, and he's very outgoing, compared to the introverts who are not outgoing, who keep things to themselves, and who are not very sociable, and who are not aggressive as well. And then we had a discussion on the other personality traits, such as the conscientiousness, which are the individuals who are really dutiful, who are really committed to the organization, committed to their duty. And then we had a discussion of the openness to experience, the individuals who are really adaptive, and who are open, and who are flexible to the new changes and to the new experiences, right? They welcome them. And compared to the people who are low on this openness to experience, they are kind of closed individuals who are not open to new experiences, open to new learning, and so on. Then we had a discussion on the emotional stability, that some individuals, they are more emotionally stable and some are less emotionally stable. Then we had a discussion of a number of other personality traits, such as the risk taking. Some individuals, they have high risk taking potential, and some other individuals have low risk taking potential. Again, the individuals who have a high risk takers, they are expected to be more innovative compared to the individuals who are low risk takers. Then the type A and type B personalities, we saw that how type A personalities, they are really aggressive, and how they try to jump up to the output, and they try to reach the conclusions, and how they are more into the quantity, and they're not that much concerned about the quality, but they just want to achieve figures and numbers. And they are basically restless individuals who are trying to meet deadlines and trying to achieve their targets. They have strict targets for them, and they try to achieve those targets, and that they're more into the quantity than to the quality. Whereas the type B personality people, they're really calm and easygoing, and they're not setting tough targets for them, not very much concerned about the deadlines. not so much focusing or emphasis on the achievement of the targets and on the achievement of the quantity and increasing the quantity and increasing the output. They are basically easygoing and they are basically calm, not very target oriented. Then the proactive individuals who really are initiative taking and who are quite active and proactively they try to seek the problems and they try to identify the solutions of those problems proactively. So they even try to identify the problem even before it has occurred, right? So at very early stages, compared to the reactive people who start solving the problem after it has occurred, right? So the reactive people, they are basically responding to the environment, while the proactive people are basically trying to get hold of the environment and trying to manipulate the environment and trying to bring changes in the environment proactively, right? So even before something wrong has occurred, or as soon as it has occurred, they try to fix it, or even before it has occurred, they try to fix it. And so that is the proactive approach. Then the self-efficacy, we already discussed this personality trait, that this self-efficacy is that how much you feel confident of yourself that you can perform in a number of situations, how confidently you can perform your perceptions about yourself. Then we had a discussion about the political skills, that how some individuals, they are really good in the politics, they have high political skills, and some individuals, they are not good in political skills, they have low political skills. So the individuals who are high in political skills, how they can they are strong in the interpersonal relations, they know how to manipulate the interpersonal relations and interpersonal situations, and how to give a very positive image of themselves in front of others, giving this image to others that they're really sincere to them, and they are really so they are really astute and they're really professional in their relationships, especially with the significant others. They have very astute relationships, and as a result, these people, they tend to get greater benefits, because they tend to get more favorable share of the organizational resources. They try to get better promotions, they try to get better performance evaluations as a result of their political skills. And it has been reported that these individuals are actually successful in gaining all these organizational benefits and all these rewards because of their astuteness and because of their political skills, right? And the individuals who are low on political skills, they're basically adopting this defensive strategy. They don't want to be a part of these organizational politics, and they try to remain more aloof and from the what is happening in the organization, so that those people are reported not to get as much promotions and as much favorable distribution of resources as the people who are high on political skills. They are reported to get more promotions and they are more prominent in the eyes of the higher management. Then we discussed that how the person and job fit is important, and the person and the organization fit is important. So the person organization fit is the fit of the person's values and the person's norms and the cultures with that of the organizational culture, and what are the norms and the values of the organization. So that fit is really important. If the individual is really risk averse and the organization is innovative, then the culture of the organization may not match with the personality traits of the individuals, because for an innovative organization, you need to be really risk taking, right? And therefore there is a mismatch between the two. So the organization needs to conduct, as we talked earlier, the organization needs to conduct the tests of the personality of the individual to make sure that what is the nature of the job that the individual is going to perform, and what kind of personality characteristics he has, whether he can do that or he cannot do that, right? So that is the person and job fit. Then match the personality of the individual with the requirements of the job. Then we discuss the concept of of perception, that what is perception and why it is important, because we know that our behavior and our attitudes, they are basically determined from our perceptions, and not what actually is in the organizations, because if there are certain practices who are falling in place in the organization, and my perceptions can be different from the perceptions of my colleagues, right? And my behavior will be determined by my perceptions of the practices of the human resource policies and practices, right? And my colleagues' perceptions will be, my behavior will be based on his or her perceptions of the situation, right? So my perceptions can be different from my colleagues' perception. As a result, our attitudes and behaviors can be different. We discussed the attribution theory, that how the individuals, they try to link up certain events to the external or the internal factors, and they try to attach those the certain events with the external or the internal factors. So we discussed that it with the help of the consensus and the consistency and the distinctiveness, and we saw that how the individuals, these by being high on or low on these different factors, the individuals attribute to the of certain events to external factors or the internal factors responsible for certain events or situations. Then we discussed the different errors and biases in the attributions, and we also saw the frequently used shortcuts in judging others. We discussed the selective perception, that how we try to process only the selective information on the basis of what our perception is. So for example, if I'm driving on a car and I have a car of red color, I will be seeing more cars of red color. I'll be noticing more cars of red color that are passing on the road. I'll be noting them more, right, compared to the other cars, right? So that is because of the selective perception. We are seeing what we want to see, or we process only that information, or we pick only that information that we want to see. Then we discussed this halo effect, wherein when on the basis of one certain trait or quality of the individual, you make an overall assessment of that individual. Then we discussed this contrast effect. We also saw the projections and the stereotyping. Then we saw the specific applications in the organizations, such as the employment interview, the performance expectations, how the different these different shortcuts and the different biases, they influence on the specific applications in the organization, such as the employment interview, the performance expectations, the ethnic profiling, and the performance evaluations. We also established the link between the perceptions and the individual decision making. We saw the assumptions of the rational decision making model. We discussed it in great detail, that how the decision making is rational, and what are the factors that influence the rational decision making, what are the limitations to the rational decision making, and then we discussed the concept of this bounded rationality in relation to this, whether when the decision making actually cannot be rational. Then we discussed the different components of creativity. We also saw how the decisions are actually made in organizations, what are the common biases and errors. We also saw the intuition, that how sometimes the managers, they make decisions based on intuitions, right? And how a good combination of the rational decisions as well as the intuitive decisions, that can be a good thing to do. And sometimes the managers, they make their decisions entirely on intuitions, and they are successful. And sometimes there are chances that the decisions that are based entirely on intuitions, that can fail as well. But it is good to make a combination of the decisions that should be both intuitively and rationally, right? So then we saw the individual differences in decision making, and we saw the organizational constraints on decision making. We saw the cultural differences in the decision making. We saw that how under different cultures the decisions are made differently. And we also saw that how one individual can respond differently to one problem. For one problem, one individual may not perceive one problem as a problem, and another individual may perceive that as a problem. Then we saw that ethics and decision making, how the decision making needs to be ethical. what makes the decisions ethical and what makes the decisions not ethical. Then we saw that the different ways to improve the decision making, and we saw the how the biases and errors that are created, they can be reduced. Then we discussed the different influences on the employee behavior and the major categories of the employee behavior. We saw the different external influences on the employee behavior, such as the external factors in the external environment and the factors in the work environment. Factors in the external environment are all the different the factors in the pestle framework. You can use that pestle framework herein as well, that how those environmental factors influence the organization and ultimately they influence the individual as well, such as due to the recession there are layoffs, and they influence the people who are being laid off, and they also influence the survivors, and they also influence the behavior of the survivors in a way that they start feeling more insecure at their jobs. Then the factors in the work environment, they are also influencing the employees' behavior, and in relation to this we discussed that what is the role of the supervisor, how he influences the employees' behavior, how the relationship quality with the supervisor influences the employee behavior. And we discussed this with the reference to the leader-member exchange theory, that how the leaders, they form different quality of relationships with the different subordinates. So with some subordinates whom they call the in-groupers, they form good quality relationships, and with some other subordinates they do not form that good quality relationships, and that can be because of the differences in the capabilities of the individuals. So in the in-groupers there might be the individuals who are more capable, and in the out-groupers there can be the individuals who are not that capable. Then we discussed that how as a result of the formation of these in-groupers and the out-groupers, the in-groupers they are given more favorable distribution of resources compared to the out-groupers, and how the in-groupers, they have the positive influence on their behavior compared to the out-groupers. They might have these unfairness perceptions in their eyes, and their behavior might be their performance might be lower, their productivity might be lower, and their behavior they may not be as much satisfied as the in-groupers are. Then there are also factors in the internal environment that influence the employee behavior, such as the attitudes of the individuals, their knowledge, skills and abilities. The more knowledgeable they have, the more skills they have, and the more abilities they have to perform the job, the more they are likely to show positive behaviors at the workplace, and the better their performance is expected to be, right? And of course these knowledge, skills and abilities, they can also be learned in the organization, and as a result of the improvement in these knowledge, skills and abilities, they can improve their behavior. Then in our lecture 18 we discussed the concept of the equal employment opportunity, and with reference of Pakistani law we saw that how the organization should give the employees that all the organizations, they're bound by as per law to treat all employees equally, and there should be no discrimination on the basis of the sex, age, creeds or caste or religion or the national origin or ethnicity. There should be no discrimination between the employees, between the potential employees and between the current employees of the organization. And we discussed that the sexual harassment, which is any undue or unwelcome advance on the part of the one party towards the other party of the opposite sex. And we also discussed the detailed procedure as per Pakistani law, that how the organizations, they should deal with the sexual harassment procedure, how should they have a sexual harassment policy, and how that policy should be well communicated to all the employees in the organization, and how there should be the procedure to launch the complaint against any sexual harassment cases, and how any such case should be dealt with a great vigilance and very actively and very fastly, right, without delay. Then there should be strong signals from the organization, from the management. There should be commitment of the management towards this sexual harassment cases, and the harasser should be penalized if the harassment is proved, so that any such cases they do not arise in the future. Then vis-a-vis the equal employment opportunity, we discussed the concepts of the adverse impact, that how the certain policies of the organization they screen out some of the applicants from the some of the potential applicants from the applicants list, right? So and thus adversely impact the certain protected class, and how this it can be any such practices by the organization may not be termed as discriminatory if they are done on the basis of the bona fide occupational qualifications, or they are done because that was a business necessity. If the organization proves that the practices are not discriminatory, but they were the requirement of the occupation, or they were the requirement, or they were the necessity of the business, then the organization can get cover that it did not enter into the discriminatory practices. So we discussed that how in the recruitment there can be a number of practices, and the selection standards there can be a number of practices, such as if you set the requirements for the specific color or age, or requirement for the height of the individual, or the physical characteristics of the individual, if you set this kind of standards, or you do the recruitment by word of mouth, or by way of help wanted ads, they're all discriminatory employment practices, and they should not be practiced. Then we discussed the diversity management, that what is the challenge for the managers when it comes to the diverse workforce and the diverse population. How it can introduce on one hand introduce the diversity and the creativity in the organization and in the team, and multiple perspectives, but on the other hand it can also invite the conflict when there are different people of the different backgrounds, when they are working together under one roof, and they are coming with altogether different ideas. The conflict can also arise between them, and we know that initially when conflict is C-type, it can also convert into A-type conflict, which is very dysfunctional. So that is a challenge for the managers to manage this diversity. So we discussed it, and this is again an important topic. Then we saw the workforce diversity in practice. And we saw the diversity's benefits. We saw the equal employment opportunity versus affirmative action. We know that affirmative action is the policies or the actions that are taken by the employer to correct any discriminatory practices that have been occurring in the past. So to make any corrections on discriminatory errors that were done in the past, in order to compensate for them, the management uses this affirmative action policy. And then we saw that how the management can improve the productivity through this diversity management, and how there are the options of recruiting minorities online. We discussed the case of the reverse discrimination as well, which they call that this affirmative action is a case of reverse discrimination. We discussed that how the labor unions are formed, what is the collective bargaining process, who are the parties that are involved in this collective bargaining process, of course the employer representative and the employee representative, who is the labor union representative, right? How the bargaining, it needs to be good faith, right? And we discussed a number of 12 to 13 points that indicate whether the bargaining is good faith or not. You need to learn those points, and you need to understand the implications of those points, that what do they actually mean. Then when that good faith bargaining is violated, and you need to know what are the conditions for good faith bargaining, how the parties they enter into the negotiations, what are the different bargaining items. We discussed that the mandatory bargaining items, the voluntary bargaining items, and the optional bargaining and the bargaining items that cannot be talked about, or that cannot be bargained, or the restricted items, right? So we discussed these three categories of the bargaining items, and we saw that what are their implications. We also saw the bargaining stages and the process, how if the bargaining is not successful, situation enters into the impasse, and then the employees, they can enter into the strikes and picketing. And under strikes, we saw that how there are different types of strikes, what strikes are legal and what strikes are illegal. And we also discussed that when the striking employees, they go on the picketing, then what is the duty of the employer, and what are the responsibilities of the employer, and what are the rights of the employer, or what should the employer do when the striking employees enter into the picketing. Then we also discussed that in order to break that impasse, there is the option of the third party involvement, in which the mediation can be called for, as well as arbitration can be called for, and the decision of mediator is not final, or the mediator has no authority to make any decision. He can only make recommendations, and the arbitrator has the authority to make the decision, or the arbitrator gives a final decision, and it is binding on both the parties to accept that decision. Then we saw the grievances, the procedure, how there should be grievance policy, grievance handling policy, grievance procedure should be jotted down, and that grievance procedure should be followed, and that should be in place. And we also discussed a number of labor laws in Pakistan. So that was our discussion from today, wherein we discussed a number of lectures, the important points, the key points of a number of lectures that we have done for this course. I hope this exercise that we are doing now of trying to recap, and as well as trying to collect all the information together in these 3 lectures, make a summation of all that information, and so that it is a kind of a summary of what we have done, right? So I hope it can actually give you an overview of what we have done, of what all the management course was all about, and it can give you an idea of how it can give a mental map to you on how you have to prepare and how you have to proceed for this course, and it can give you a more coherent approach to deal with this course, right? So thank you for your patient hearing. I'll see you again with the last lecture from this course. Allah Hafiz.